Hello, Bible Sleuth here. Can I help you? Oh, I have never done that kind of investigation. I'm not that kind of investigator. Have you called the sheriff about your son? I'm sorry that he's lost, but like I said, I've never done that kind of investigating. Well, I can look into it. What kind of clothes did he have on when you last saw him? What is his phone number? How tall is he? Okay, 5'7". Um, well, can you text me a picture of him? Okay. Um, listen, I'll look into it, but I'm telling you, I think you need to call the sheriff's department when we hang up. All right. Well, I'll be in touch. Yes, sir. Yep. Okay. Bye. I'm sure every parent has had at least one brief moment of panic in the store when a young child manages to slip away and temporarily become missing. Today, we will finish the last case of the three lost series parables, the Prodigal Son. Let's go to the scene in Luke 15:11 through 32. And he said, there was a man who had two sons, and the younger of them said to his father, Father, give me the share of property that is coming to me. And he divided his property between them. Not many days later, the younger son gathered all he had and took a journey into a far country. And there he squandered his property in reckless living. And when he had spent everything, a severe famine arose in that country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to one of the citizens of that country, who sent him into his fields to feed pigs. And he was longing to be fed with the pods that the pigs ate, and no one gave him anything. But when he came to himself, he said, how many of my father's hired servants have more than enough bread, but I perish here with hunger? I will arise and go to my father, and I will say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Treat me as one of your hired servants. And he arose and came to his father. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and felt compassion, and ran and embraced him and kissed him. And the son said to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. But the father said to his servants, bring quickly the best robe and put it on him, and put a ring on his hand and shoes on his feet. And bring the fatted calf and kill it, and let us eat and celebrate. For this my son was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. And they began to celebrate. Now his older son was in the field, and as he came and drew near to the house, he heard music and dancing. And he called one of the servants and asked what these things meant. And he said to him, your brother has come, and your father has killed the fatted calf, because he has received him back safe and sound. But he was angry and refused to go in. His father came out and entreated him, but he answered his father, look, these many years I have served you, and I never disobeyed your command. Yet you never gave me a young goat that I might celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours came, who has devoured your property with prostitutes, you killed the fatted calf for him. And he said to him, Son, you're always with me, and all that is mine is yours. It was fitting to celebrate and be glad, for this your brother was dead and is alive. He was lost and now is found. So that is the Prodigal Son parable, one of the longest recorded parables that Jesus told, and probably one of the most famous. Do you have questions? I know I do. There's a plethora of good information on this parable, but being a Bible sleuth, I really want to tackle some of the more unsolved ideas that surround this parable. To keep grounded, I think it's important to remember who Jesus told the parable to. And if you haven't seen the other lost videos, you should check those out. As I mentioned, I have questions like, why did the son ask for his inheritance early? Or why was the youngest brother the one who asked for the inheritance? And why did the son run to a foreign land? Also, how did the responses of the father, the prodigal, and the brother equate to the other two parables? So let's head to the library. Check this out. After a bit of research, I may have stumbled upon an answer to the first two questions. You see, it was not unheard of at that time for the youngest child to ask for a cut in the inheritance up front, since the majority was to go to the oldest son. This could possibly eliminate the potential of the youngest being totally disinherited by his older brother. We saw an example of this in the bigger Barnes case found in Luke 12, 13 through 21. A man in the crowd asked Jesus to intermediate between him and his brother about his inheritance. Well, I guess the probable answer to the first two questions is the prodigal was the younger brother, wanting to grab his inheritance before he could be put out by his older brother. To me, this might indicate a potential ongoing rift between the two, especially in light of the older brother's response. Next, why did the prodigal take off and go into a foreign land? Look at Deuteronomy 7, 1 through 4 in the ESV. When the Lord your God brings you into the land that you are entering to take possession of it, and clears away many nations before you, the Hittites, the Girgashites, the Amorites, the Canaanites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites, 7 nations more numerous and mighty than you. And when the Lord your God gives them over to you, and you defeat them, then you must devote them to complete destruction. Harsh, right? They were to be exterminated. You shall make no covenant with them, and show no mercy to them. You shall not intermarry with them, giving your daughters to their sons, or taking their daughters for your sons, for they would turn away your sons from following me to serve other gods. So they were forbidden to intermarry with the surrounding nations. Very possibly, I see how this relates to God and Israel. We should read Jeremiah 3:8, where God sent Israel away to captivity with a decree of divorce. So this could tie back to the lost coin and the probability of a broken marriage due to the loss of that coin. Interestingly, these nations had possible religious ties to the Nephilim found in Genesis 6:5, where the great flood is found. The gods of these nations were supposed to be offsprings of deities who had intermingled with the daughters of man. In Numbers 13:28 through 29, when the spies entered the land, they reported, "The people who dwell in the land are strong, and the cities are fortified and very large. And besides, we saw descendants of Enoch there." Notice, centuries later, Israel was divided and the northern kingdom completely gone. Judah had been taken over by Babylon, and the promised 70 years of exile had passed, and Judah was trickling back to Jerusalem. Look what was said in Ezra 9:9. After these things had been done, the officials approached me and said, "The people of Israel and the priests and the Levites have not separated themselves from the peoples of the land with their abominations from the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Perizzites, the Jebusites, the Ammonites, the Moabites, the Egyptians, and the Amorites." Say what? Why were they still around? For they have taken some of their daughters to be wives for themselves and for their sons, so that the holy race has mixed itself with the peoples of the lands. And in this faithlessness, the hand of the officials and chief men has been foremost. It was very shameful, but noticed it was the religious leaders who had done the most. Back to the parable. For a son to run to a foreign land, this departure would have brought the ultimate shame on the father in that day. The shame in this parable didn't end either. When the money was spent, a famine hit, almost as if it was a correlation. He was left feeding swine. It's interesting Jesus chose swine, an animal that was unclean to eat. Yet the son was wishing to eat the same food as the pigs, but not given any. It is a picture of what sin does. Totally humiliated, the son returned home to offer to become a servant. It is here that we see a true example of repentance. When we offer ourselves up to be slaves standing before God, He shows His love, running to greet us, having been looking for our return. Notice He restores us as sons and daughters. This portion of the story we understand, for it paints a vivid picture of God as the most loving Father. He's wanting to cleanse the vile sin to those who are humbled before Him. But Jesus had been saying that all along, basically reiterating what was said all through the Old Testament. Every promise to punish the Israelites for running to a foreign land and squandering inheritance was accompanied with His plea for them to come back and be restored. That restoration is still offered even today for Israel. The problem still realizing that the storyteller was the only way to the Father. Even though Jesus never sinned, the filth of all the sin was cast upon Him. He wasn't the prodigal, yet He became the prodigal for us. Remember His words on the cross. Matthew 27:46. My God, why have you forsaken me? Hebrews 10:12-13 says, but when Christ had offered for all time a single sacrifice for sins, He sat down at the right hand of God, waiting from that time until His enemies should be made a footstool for His feet. That is powerful stuff. But let's get our bearings. Jesus was talking to the scribes and Pharisees, which brings us to the oldest brother. For the longest time, I couldn't figure out why Jesus had the two brothers in this story, considering how powerful the prodigal part is. And of course, having the oldest brother being upset and unforgiving of the other brother really adds to the mystery. If you think about it, it's a repeated history with Jacob and Esau. It wasn't until I started this investigation that the notion arose that Jesus was probably associating the older brother to the Pharisees and the scribes. So how did I come up with that theory? Well, look at what the brother says. Look, these many years I have served you, and I never disobeyed your command, yet you never gave me a young goat that I might celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours came, who has devoured your property with prostitutes, you killed the fatted calf for him. Notice he didn't identify as a relative, but said, this your son. Also, it's interesting that the older brother knew the younger brother's activities when he was gone. So how did he know that? The correlation is the Pharisees and scribes supposedly were religious leaders and therefore not in need of repentance. And I never disobeyed your command. Remember what Jesus said to them at the end of the lost sheep story? I say unto you that likewise joy shall be in heaven over one sinner that repents, more than over 99 just persons which need no repentance. Jesus has the Father say something that I've always taken as positive. Now I'm not so sure it was. And He said unto him, Son, you're always with me, and all that I have is yours. It was fitting to celebrate and be glad, for this your brother was dead, and is alive. He was lost and is found. Out of any of these three parables, this is the only time the word dead is used. Obviously, dead refers to the condition of the lost son, but I think that there is a duality to what Jesus was saying. Quite possibly the father was pointing out what the older brother was wanting as well. Notice Jesus reconnected the family ties. Your brother was dead and was lost. I believe this is a glaring statement that the younger brother may have been correct in assuming that he would have been disinherited. Is it possible that Jesus was pointing out that the older brother was somewhat responsible for the lost brother's behavior? That has some extremely bad implications and unfortunately consequences too. The religious leaders had unlimited access to the scriptures, as well as all of the other writings, so they didn't have need of repentance. They were also jealous of Jesus, worried he was really the Messiah. And if he was the Messiah, he would mess up the good thing they had going. And in their eyes, the publicans and sinners were really dead. In all actuality, they were breaking the second commandment. Romans 3:23 says, "For all have sinned and come short of the glory of God." Religious practices and good works do not replace a contrite and repentant heart that comes to God in his or her sinful humiliation. The cool thing about the parable of the prodigal son is this: the father's hand is extended to the lost one, but also to the one who thinks he has no need of repentance. In other words, he still loves the scribes and Pharisees. His hand has been extended over the course of the Jewish history and still is for those who will believe that he is the Messiah, who came to die in our place and redeem us from our wickedness. Equally important, he rose again. As I mentioned earlier in Hebrews 10, his hand is extended to the world. Notice that an animal was killed at the celebration of the prodigal's return. I believe it's a reference to Jesus' sacrifice that he would be making on the cross. So what's the final verdict on the three lost parables? Regardless of the status, we are all sheep who have gone astray. God looks beyond the shame of position and choices to bring someone into the fold, clean them up, and make them a son or daughter, because his love for us is beyond understanding.